The broadcast is now starting.
All right, here we are. Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to the next episode of the PixelMill webinar series and this edition of Build Your First SharePoint Framework Webpart. My name is Michael Wells. I am the Community and Partnerships Manager here at PixelMill. And again, thank you for joining us. A couple quick housekeeping things. We will be recording the session, so if you miss anything and you might want to go back and check it out later, we will have a video up, hopefully by Monday. Keep an eye out for that after we're done here. Also, if you have any questions at any time throughout the webinar, please feel free to put them in. There should be a chat or questions spot available for you guys to enter those in. I'll be monitoring that, and I will try to interrupt Eric as I can. If we're not able to get to it during the webinar, there is going to be a 15-minute Q&A at the end, so we'll try to catch everything at that time. Without further ado, I'll stop talking. Here is our man of the hour, Mr. Eric Overfield. Take it away.
All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us. I've got my housekeeping stuff on this session. All right. So this is, to me, a 101 series, Intro to SharePoint Framework Webpart. Now, when I've given this as a presentation, I would normally ask, hey, everyone raise your hand if they've been working with the framework or not. In this case, what I'm going to be assuming is that you probably are somewhat new to the framework, or maybe you've touched it a little bit. We're going to start from the beginning, but we're going to quickly go through and look at what other features are available within the framework and how to really get started and learn more. This is not a 1-hour topic. This is a multi-day topic if you really want to get started with it. So my idea here is to just give you the intro, help you get started so that you've seen it take place, you've seen it work out, and then we'll go from there. 4 major demos, 3 of them are code-based. All of the code that you may want, you can get right now over at github.com/eoverfield/the SPFx-demos. As well as if you want the slide deck, you can get that now from the Pixely address you'll see in the lower right-hand corner. The capitalization is important, the capital EO SPFX intro. Yeah, so with that, let's go ahead and kind of get started here. Let's kick this off. First, who I am, for those of you who I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Eric Overfield. I'm president, co-founder of PixelMill. PixelMill, we kind of help clients do what we're going to be going over. We help them build portals on top of SharePoint. So if you're looking to leverage Office 365 or SharePoint on-prem environment, hey, we would really enjoy talking to you and seeing how we can help you build a portal that works for you. I am a Microsoft MVP in the Office servers and services space. Done that for 2 years now. I was recently awarded the Microsoft Regional Director, which I'm pretty proud of. There's only about 150 of those in the world, and that's quite a lot of fun. I've co-authored a couple of books. I'm heavily involved in the Northern California SharePoint Office 365 user groups, SharePoint Saturdays all over the Western U.S., and then I speak on this kind of subject throughout the entire United States as well as in Europe. Best ways to get a hold of me if you're looking for me, if you follow my blog at ericoverfield.com. I always try to post information that I think is cool, as well as I love to get into the code when I have opportunities. You can also always follow me on Twitter at Eric Overfield. Okay, so that was all the fun stuff. What we're going to look at this morning here, we're going to look at the framework first as an overview, like just what is it. So those of you who've really you've heard these buzzwords, let's go ahead and discuss what that is. We're then going to jump into the tool chain itself and look at how we're going to be building our SPFx Webparts, because it is very different than classic SharePoint development, shall we say. Effectively, all of the tools you might have learned and almost really all of the languages that you learned before in classic Webpart development is going to be changed, and that is a good thing. SPFx follows what I like to call modern web development or current web development trends. The development world on the internet moved to this kind of tool chain years ago, and it's nice to see SharePoint follow along and move into that. We're then going to look into the Webpart components, so like what actually makes a Webpart and how does it all fit together. And then we're going to finish up with like looking at the extras of Webparts. We're going to look at some properties, like how do we add Webpart properties. We'll look at packaging if we have time, which we should, and what else you can use to get started. There's so much here, and there's so much I have to skip just in interest of time. But don't worry, there's a lot of links for you, and I've got future webinars planned with the rest of our team, and we're going to have external people come in hopefully throughout the year to help you learn how to use this brand new development model. So let's quickly then look at sort of SharePoint development, how it sort of progressed. Back in '03 with SharePoint, well, '01, but '03 came out. We had full trust solutions. That's how we were able to customize SharePoint. And we still have that on-prem, by the way. Full trust is still available in SharePoint 2016, but it is not cloud-friendly. We've lost that ability. In 2010, SharePoint introduced an isolation model where you could build solutions with custom code that were isolated, so it wasn't on your entire farm, called sandbox solutions. They worked. Visual Studio was still needed. You still built them in C#, etc. And that worked well, but the isolation really wasn't strong enough. The custom code would still run within SharePoint, and that wouldn't work in the cloud. So SharePoint 2013 added the app, then renamed to the add-in model, that would allow you to have provider-hosted apps where you could build the logic and you could then offload it onto some other service, some other server. Maybe you could put it over in Azure, etc. But it would keep SharePoint itself free of your custom code, which in a cloud world was necessary because Microsoft can't trust that your code isn't going to do bad things. So if you want to have some custom stuff, you could go put it over in your own Azure environment, run it on IIS, just have SharePoint link over to it. It worked. It's still available, and it is still fully supported. Microsoft has not had any hint that they're going to deprecate it. One of the primary reasons why that I see that they're going to keep it is the add-in model still allows an isolation that SharePoint Framework does not allow. It still allows a component to not be able to really be eavesdropped by other components, and that's a good thing. Now in SharePoint 2016, in 2016, Microsoft announced the SharePoint Framework. This was May 4th, 2016. Side little plug, May 16th, 2017, for those of you who are on the call live or hear this early, Microsoft is going to have another big event, and if you just really Google SharePoint May 16, 2017, you'll get the link and you can go watch the new future of SharePoint, shall we say. Anyhow, in 2016, SPFx was officially announced as being something that they were working on. It is currently, it's what we're talking about. It's currently only available in SharePoint Online, but Microsoft has said that within this fiscal year, they do expect, or within this calendar year, excuse me, they do expect the SharePoint Framework to be released as a feature pack for on-prem 2016. So that's sort of like the history. So what is the framework? Well, what the framework is itself, it's currently a Webpart model, but Microsoft has talked about being a page model for providing embedded first-class citizen native integration of client-side SharePoint development. This is something a lot of us have been doing for a very long time with SharePoint. We've been using our lovely script editor Webpart, or maybe even our custom Webparts, and we've then been using JavaScript to do a lot of our rendering of the user interface. We've been using JavaScript and Angular to provide single-page apps or spas, etc., so that we could, in a sense, not touch the back end of SharePoint, not touch the master page, page layouts, or anything like that, and we just do all of our development in JavaScript, and then using REST APIs or things like that, we would go grab the data that we needed and bring it back into our page. The SharePoint framework provides that for us built into SharePoint, as well as already pre-built with the whole toolchain and the tooling necessary and extra classes to make interacting with SharePoint much easier in a much more consistent manner that can be used by yourself for your own organization, or for VARs that are creating products or whatnot, so we have more of a consistent experience. The framework is built on top of open source tooling, which is awesome. These are things like Node.js, NPM, Yeoman, Gulp, TypeScript, so much more. And again, this is sort of where the world has gone, definitely web development world, definitely with Node.js, NPM, Gulp. Yeoman is very widely used, and don't worry, we'll get into what these all are soon. TypeScript as a language, it's becoming much more used. When I was first introduced to it last year, the documentation was pretty thin. Now I can get TypeScript documentation. Almost everything I need has now been answered over at Stack Overflow, or even in TypeScript's own documentation, so pretty cool. The framework, though, also has built in with it REST API wrapper classes that give us access into SharePoint data, as well as making external API calls real easily. So this is all wrapped in for us. Like, we can just make these calls and we get it. And I've already talked about this is currently generally available. It's publicly available on SharePoint Online. You can now use it now, and we do expect to see it in SharePoint 2017. We expect to see it on-prem this year. So how does this all work? Well, again, SPFx, the big thing I want you to think about is this is all about client-side rendering. So we're not building any compiled code here. We're not building any C#. There's no Visual Studio necessary to build WSPs. We're not putting anything into SharePoint. We're able to build an environment using client-side languages such as Typescript, which gets translated to JavaScript, to build our customizations that get put on top of SharePoint, not really in it. I keep saying Visual Studio. Well, what's nice about the framework is really your IDE, it's not even necessary what it is. You can use Notepad if you wanted. You can use what I would highly recommend, which is Visual Studio Code, which is a free open source version, a free open source editor, not even really it's not based on Visual Studio. It's a glorified text editor, but it's really good because it has a lot of components built into it, things like IntelliSense for Typescript, which is really nice. I've talked about the toolchain, the modern toolchain that's important to us. We're not having to use a script editor Webpart or some sort of weird JavaScript injection or JavaScript embed to make all this work. We're able to use the toolchain, the tooling that the framework provides, run some simple commands in PowerShell. It creates for us packages which we then upload into SharePoint, or we can use PNP to upload into SharePoint to then be able to utilize our web parts within our site collections and sites, which is just really cool stuff. The last thing I want to talk about is the iframe. So if any of you have used the add-in model, you know that the add-ins are really added as an iframe, which is sort of clunky. It's definitely not the most mobile friendly. Well, SPFx, it's natively responsive. That doesn't mean your code will not help break that a little, but in general, it's designed to be mobile ready, and is directly integrated into the page itself. It's not using some sort of iframe for isolation. That's a good and bad thing. That's a whole other discussion, but it's something worth thinking about. Okay, so let's kind of look at how this relates to traditional development. We'll go into then each of the tools in the tool chain now. So before in classic development, we had IIS, which was running our web server, and then we would use .NET and Visual Studio in order to build our application and then spin something up and shoot it off into SharePoint. Now our core, the base tool we're going to use, and we really don't even use it much. Well, we use it heavily, but we don't interact with it directly. We use other tools to interact with it. We're using Node.js, which is a network application framework. It's based on JavaScript. It's something that runs only on your development environment. So I'm on a laptop right now, and you're going to see as I build some web parts for us, I'm going to build this all on my laptop using just Node as this back-end application framework. But again, it's only needed while I'm developing. Once I'm done developing and I'm ready to push the package into SharePoint, Node isn't needed anymore by this. So we're going to see our tool chain could be very bloated. That's only during development. The actual code that gets put to SharePoint is actually very lean. But Node is the base. That we need that program. We'll look at how we can quickly install it. But it's a good example of, or it's a good comparison to look at .NET IIS. Now, in classic development, we use NuGet to go grab external packages and external modules or dependencies. We're going to use now NPM, Node Package Manager. This sits on top of Node. So a lot of tooling has been built to help things like building task runners or building packages or building tools like a TypeScript to JavaScript compiler or transpiler or all kinds of cool stuff. Well, those require modules, and those modules have been built. They're freely available. They're open source. But those modules depend on other modules, and there's a whole chain of all these dependencies, and NPM helps us with that. So we're able to say, hey, we need these 10 primary modules in order to make this thing work. We can then use NPM to go and make sure that we have all of the modules, submodules, and all the dependencies we may need, and it will go and download all that stuff for us. That tool chain, by the way, as of now, is about 900 megabytes of stuff, which can take minutes and minutes and minutes to go download the first time you set up a development environment. But NPM does that for us. All of that bloat that you see is only for development. None of that, very little of it really gets deployed into SharePoint. So when the framework first came out, people got really upset with the toolchain is so bloated. There are other reasons to be upset with it, but don't worry about your production code. It's still going to be pretty lean, dependent upon, of course, your own coding ability. So in Visual Studio, we had project templates. We could go say we'd like to create a new SharePoint 2013 project. In the framework, we have a tool that we're going to use. It's another module, a part of Node, called Yeoman. So Microsoft has created Yeoman templates for us that we can use to go and spin up a new framework Webpart that has scaffolding built around it so we can get started. The community has started to develop their own Yeoman templates, which is kind of nice, and you can do that as well. You can build your own Yeoman template that will scaffold up your own web part based around your specific organizational needs maybe, or maybe you're a community member want to deliver some sort of updated web part scaffolding, and you could totally do that using Yeoman. We used to use C#, not anymore. We have to use non-compiled languages. We're going to be using TypeScript here, which is basically it transpiles to JavaScript. TypeScript is probably going to be the biggest hurdle for most people moving from classic to modern development. And I was one of those for about 2 days. I then spent the time, I learned the basics of TypeScript. It's not that bad. Once you get it, you're going to love it. TypeScript is not built for like 20 lines of JavaScript code. TypeScript is designed where you're building a larger application. So if you're going to do like a small little slider library, you're probably going to do that in JavaScript. Totally got it. But if you want to build an application within JavaScript, you're going to probably want to start looking at how TypeScript can help you do that. And then lastly, the main tool I want to talk about, when we were building our code, we would use MS Build to put it all together. Now we're going to be using a tool, another package built on top of Node called Gulp, and that's our task runner. We're going to basically be able to tell Gulp, hey, go do your thing, and it will build everything for us, put it all together, and create an environment we can then use to test the web part that we're building, and then even help us package it in even more. So that's kind of an overview of the tool chain. There's a lot of other subcomponents, but those are the big ones that I really want you to know about. Okay, so then let's look at now. We need an environment to build, right? So now you've got this idea of the tools we need. We now need to spin it up. One of the first things you're going to need as of right now is a SharePoint Online tenant, because that's the only place you can really deploy these things. You don't need that to test and to build your web part until you want to start talking to SharePoint Data, but it's kind of the first place to go. Your existing SharePoint Online tenant, if you have one, already has what you need to get started with the framework, so nothing else really new that you need to do. If you want to actually deploy your web part into SharePoint, which I assume you want to do, you will need to have an app catalog. That's a whole session in and of itself. I provided you a link to go create your own app catalog if you don't already have one. It's pretty easy to do. It's just I don't really want to spend the time now to go over something. You can just follow some easy instructions. You need a workstation. You need someplace to build this. Before you needed something strong enough to run Visual Studio. Not anymore. This is pretty cool stuff. You could use really any operating system. The popular ones that I know of really are Windows 10, and then iOS and Mac. There are a bunch of Mac developers or Mac users who build on the framework, so it totally works really well. So don't forget the toolchain being open source. You don't necessarily need a dedicated development environment. My whole company, all of our devs, they use their own workstations, laptops, Surface, whatever, Apples as well. Macs as well to build the web parts, because it's just JavaScript, and the toolchain, as I said, is JavaScript based. It's all open source. In my opinion, this is so much easier to set up and get going than the classic development that we're used to. Once you get it set up and you kind of get used to the command line, which I know Visual Studio developers are like, the command line, I thought we left that. I personally find you find so much more control at the command line. It's something that I definitely would prefer to stick with. Okay, so if you now want to set this up, I've got a link for you that goes through in text detail everything we're going to go through. So I've got that link at the top for you if you want it. But basically, again, any OS or workstation, the first thing you need to do is go download and install Node.js. Nodejs.org, Google it, you'll find it. It's at the top of the link. Microsoft is supporting really the current long-term support version. Basically, that's just the current version of Node.js, and you can keep that up to date pretty easily, but you need to install Node.js. once you've done that, that will automatically install NPM for you. You're good to go. I have found I've been working, some of the clients I've worked with, the laptops they provide to us for development are very locked down and don't allow external connections to download stuff and download HTTPS. When you install Node.js and NPM, it's going to need to download things from the internet. So I have seen it where it can take days to get Node.js installed, really because the laptop has been locked down. That is a potential issue, but you would just want to work with your internal IT to help get that going. Once you have Node installed, you need to get Yeoman and Gulp installed. Those are our two major packages we need to go get our template, our starter template, and then Gulp we use to run to run as a task runner. Very easy command. Once you've got Node installed, you can go to the command line. You should be able to type in npm I or npm install -G stands for global, and you're going to then install Yo and Gulp. That's going to go download the Yeoman and Gulp modules, and then NPM will go and download all extra sub-modules. And that will take, again, a couple of minutes. If that fails, it's probably a network connection issue that your laptop, desktop, workstation, etc. has got you locked down. Work with IT to fix that. Once you've got that installed and you've figured out all the security, you need to go get the Yeoman generator for SPFx. So that's pretty easy to do. NPM installed global. You're going to install the @Microsoft/generator-SharePoint. So it's another module. It goes and grabs the Yeoman generator, and you are mostly good to go. I mean, that really is it. If you wanted to update the Yeoman generator, because Microsoft does update the Yeoman generator, but really that's something that they'll make pretty big announcements that they've had another code drop. I have not seen anything since global availability, but you can update the Yeoman generator pretty easily. But you've got an environment. Like, you're basically set at this point. The last thing you're going to need is something to edit your code in. You can use Visual Studio, and I know that there is community efforts to make a Visual Studio template that will allow you to do all of your development. Instead of in the command line, you can use Visual Studio. But my preferred method, I use Visual Studio Code. It's free, open source, works on different platforms. It's really nice. It's simple. But you can use Sublime Text, Notepad++. You could use Notepad if you were so inclined. I can't believe it. I'd ask that I could talk to you if you're going to even think about it, but you can definitely do that. So let's go ahead and let's look at our first demo here, which is a quick one, but we're going to look at a development environment. How we're going to do this really is I'm going to use the PowerShell ISE. I just found this kind of easy so I can show my code at the top, and then we can go through this. By the way, the file that I'm going to be going through is available in the GitHub repo that I've linked to, and we'll provide you that link again, so that if you sort of want to try this yourself, you can. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I've already installed a node because I kind of have to, but so I'm just doing a node-v, and what you're seeing is that I currently have version 4.4.7 installed. I actually don't think that's the most recent long-term support, but it works just fine, and so I'm going to stick with it. I have Gulp already installed. I'm not going to go through that. I've already even got the Yeoman generator installed, but to kind of show you that, I'm going to run another command that's available called yo-generators, and that shows us the Yeoman generators that I've installed, and you can see here that I have this @Microsoft/SharePoint already installed. And that's it. I told you need Node, you need Gulp, you need Yeoman, you've got it. And then the last one is Visual Studio Code, which I've already got this opened here. But if you type in code dot in the command line, it will open up Visual Studio Code. So I've already done that here, and you can see the code. This is the Git repo that I've already provided for you. And it has a whole bunch of stuff. Now, we're going to care really about two major folders. It's the Hello World and then the Webpart demos. If you want that PowerShell script that I'm running through right now, I've even provided that in that Git repo. I do have some other cool code that I think you might find useful, but I'm going to go over, of course, just the intro stuff right now. So that's it. I mean, pretty simple development environment. Now that I've got a text editor, I can then start to try to build my first web part. Cool. So okay, how are we going to do that? So let's go ahead and we're going to create a folder where we're going to put our web part. It can be anywhere in your workstation that you want, although of course I would recommend you put it some logical location. You'll change to that folder, of course, and then you're going to run the yeoman command, and that's going to be yo@Microsoft/SharePoint. You might have seen at conferences or around, if you're kind of involved in the community, you might have seen some of these yo SharePoint t-shirts. Yeah, there's no command called yo SharePoint. So anyhow, it's actually yo@Microsoft/SharePoint, but that's not that cool. That's going to go and download a whole bunch of stuff. And I literally say, go grab a cup of coffee. It's going to take a while when you build your first solution within a specific folder for Yeoman to go do all of its magic. Once you've done that, if you run the yo command again within that same solution folder, you can add as many web parts as you want, effectively as many web parts as you want to a given project or a given solution. And every time you run it again, it will take less than a second to add another web part. So really the first time you're just going grabbing the whole tool chain, all the node modules needed in order to build a web part, but you can then add more and more web parts to to a given solution, which I highly recommend. If you're building a new solution for an organization, you really want to bundle all of your web parts into ideally one or maybe two solutions. So you'll create one folder, run the yeoman command once, and then you'll run it again and again in that same solution folder, and luckily it only takes you a second to rebuild. Pretty simple stuff. Okay, now once that's done, you're going to run a command, a very simple command called gulp serve. What that's going to do, and that will take a minute or so to build your first time. Gulp serve, gulp is our task manager. It's going to go ahead and run a whole bunch of tasks that have been predefined for us, and we're going to run in particular the serve command, which is going to go look at all the code. It's going to transpile all the JavaScript. It's going to lint all the code to make sure it's all valid. It's going to do a whole bunch of stuff. It's going to package up some JavaScript and whatnot, and then it's going to run a little web server on your workstation. Now this is pretty cool stuff because it allows you to develop your web parts while anywhere in the world, as long as you have enough power to run your workstation. You do not need an internet connection. I love that. Now you can't get everything out of that, but it's a great way to do a lot of your development to make sure that it mostly works before you even get online. So what happens, gulp serve, eventually we'll spin up a little web server. It's going to load up what's called the workbench. It's a term that SharePoint provided, basically. It's going to load up a workbench in your browser, and from there you can start playing with your web part and seeing how it interacts. And that's it. It is supposed to be that simple. Now, as soon as you've run gulp serve, you should be able to also load up the SPO workbench. So SharePoint Online provides us a workbench within SharePoint that will load your local JavaScript, your local project. So that would be your tenant.sharepoint.com, probably / one of your sites, your site in question. You're going to eventually go to the _layouts / workbench.aspx location. Now it's going to automatically redirect you to /15, and we'll see that. What that allows you to do is load your web part in a live running version of SharePoint, but that is pointed to your local environment for the JavaScript. That way you don't have to upload anything into SharePoint to test your web part out. At this point, your web part can start interacting with SharePoint data with full authentication. You don't have to worry about authenticating with SharePoint to go grab data. The web part already takes care of that for you. It's supposed to be that simple. So let's go ahead and get that started. The way we're going to do it this time, we're going to go ahead and we are going to do this in two spots. I'm going to change to a new folder. Actually, I need to make a new folder here. So I'm going to, I can actually just do that down here. I'm going to make Hello World demo, and then I'm going to switch to the Hello World and yo@Microsoft/SharePoint. I need to fill out a couple of fields. It's going to ask me to do a couple of things, and this always takes a little bit of time to get going, shall we say. And if this takes too long, I'm going to go ahead and, there we go. You know, I'm going to not do it in this because I found that can be a little flaky. So I'm going to run this in PowerShell instead. Let's go ahead and go to the right folder. And here we go. Okay, so I think I already have that folder, so let's go into it. We will do yo@Microsoft/SharePoint. This should be quicker this time. There we go. It's a little easier to read. So we need to give it a solution name. So this will be the solution of the folder itself, the solution itself, not your web part, but I'll just call it Hello World. I'm going to use the current folder. That's fine. I have choices of frameworks that are pre-built for us. I'm going to go with the Node JavaScript framework. If you intend to use React, you could just go down to React. I need to give it a name. Sure, hello world's fine. A description. There we go. And now go grab your cup of coffee. So what you can see at the bottom is happening is all of the node modules are being created. That's going to take too long. I'm going to go ahead and skip that. Well, I'm going to leave it running, but we're going to go ahead and let's look at the hello world web part that was currently created for us, and that's this, this hello world thing. Now, we have a lot of files and folders. Let's look at that in a second, but what I want to show you now is if I go back to the hello world folder, and I type in gulp serve, which is what I told you would run. So I've already run the yeoman command on this hello world folder, and I already have a solution here with the 900 megs of NPM stuff. So the browser automatically loaded for me. That's weird. It looks like SharePoint, but it's not. You'll see here I'm actually at localhost, which is me. I didn't have to set any of this up. It was all done for me. I can now go ahead and I can click the add, and we can see my web part's already here. If I click on the web part, it already shows up. If I click on the little pencil, I get my developer toolbar on the property pane on the right. And here's something that's kind of cool just to show you sort of some of the reactiveness, not react, but the responsiveness, shall we? I can't even use that word, right? How quickly things and how it's all been designed. So on the right-hand side, if you look over here, I have hello world. And then go ahead and I'm going to change that. But when I do, check out this area right here. And what you can see is as I type hello world, hello attendees, you can see that the code already changed, or the web part sort of already changed as I was making a change on the right-hand side. And this is sort of the value of client-side rendering. Now, if you want to look at sort of the responsiveness, if I go ahead and make my browser smaller, you'll see that the web part itself is designed to be responsive. You can also test that out by clicking the little mobile view thing. Okay. So that's it. I mean, that's like your first web part. How easy is that? Took a little time to download this stuff. If we look, it's still downloading. But hey, you just run gulp serve and you now have a web part you can start playing with. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the slide deck. We're going to now look at what can we do with this thing that we just built, and then we'll also see eventually this thing will finish, and I will gulp serve that up as well. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to the slide deck. So, welcome to the new world. It's kind of interesting. Oops, there we go. Okay, so one of the first things you'll do is you're going to open up the code. Of course, you kind of have to, right? A bunch of folders are there. A bunch of them are new to you. I want you to focus on two. I really want you to focus on one. The primary folder you're going to spend most of your life in on SPFx Webparts is the SRC or source folder. This is where your web part source is going to go. That's what we're going to care about. The other folders are important-ish. The second one that's important really is the config folder. The config folder really only contains JSON files that are used for configuring the build, configuring your solution and the build process. There's not too many files you'll work with in there. You'll need to customize too much, but that is kind of the next place you'll go to. After that, I really hope you don't touch most of this other stuff. There's a typings folder. Typescript itself is a typed language, and it needs to know the type of variables you could have in all your JavaScript. And in order to do that, it uses something called typings. That has been moved in the general availability code drop of the SharePoint Framework to be part of NPM now in your node modules folder. So the typings folder is there, but you're not really going to use it, or you shouldn't need it. It's really there for legacy. There's a lib folder. That's only for you never should touch that, really. That's where build files are going to go. So as Gulp is doing its magic, it's going to put stuff into the lib folder. There's a dist folder, a distribution folder. This is where the code that's ready to actually get delivered into SharePoint is going to be hosted. It's going to sit. There will be a SharePoint folder created when you are ready to once you've packaged up your solution for delivery into SharePoint. But that's not something you need during testing. It's only something you need to do during packaging. And then finally, there's a big folder you're going to be tempted to delete because it seems so big. If you actually look at the file size, that's the node modules folder. You really should never touch that folder. That is managed for you by NPM. Something else to think about is if you're using a repository for your code, such as Git or TFS, etc., do not include the node modules for sure. You want to exclude that. In fact, you really want to exclude the lib folder, the dist folder, the SharePoint folder, the node modules folder from your code repository, because all of those files are always managed for you and they're generated for you by NPM. So nobody needs a group version of that. They'll just recreate it based on their own code base. So again, source, SRC folder, that's where you're going to spend most of your time. Otherwise, you're going to spend your time in the config folder. Normally, Webparts need not just custom code for their rendering, they also need to create custom properties. No worries, that's already built in for you. The ability to do that is there. It's not, there's a couple steps to go through, and I know some of this can look a little weird. There's a lot of text here. If you take the slide deck and you sort of parse this out, or you take my sample code, you'll be able to work through it. Every Webpart is going to have the Webpart name, and then props.ts folder file. This is a JSON, basically just a JSON variable, JavaScript object notation. It's a description of the Webpart properties that you want to make available that are then typed as well. If you want to provide default values for your Webpart properties, there's also a webpart.manifest.json file, again, more JSON. And in here, there is a pre-configured entities object, and in that there's a properties object, and then there you can define your custom properties so that you can have default values for them if you so wanted it. Okay, now within the Webpart itself, your Webpart file, so that's going to be your webpart.ts file. All three of these were found in the Webparts / your Webpart name folder. Your primary code is going to be in the Webpart name you provided .ts file. There is a function that you'll already see, a method you'll already see called getPropertyPaneConfiguration, and that will automatically have in it your the definition of the property toolchain that you want to have created. So that's how you're going to tell SPFx, hey, I would like these these properties to appear in this way using this kind of format, i.e. this property should be a drop-down list, defined as a drop-down list. This property should be a checkbox or a text box or all kinds of stuff. You can even create your own property types, which is some really cool stuff. Lastly, what I want to highlight is when a property value is changed. So if any property value is changed, by default, a method is triggered for you called this onPropertyPaneFieldChanged method, and it provides you the property path. So what property was changed, the variable name that you defined in your props.ts file. It'll provide the old value, what it was, and the new value. And you can now decide how you want that to work. Like if you needed to do something, you could define and say, hey, I want to override the method that SharePoint provides, and I want it to do something else. Now, people often want to get dynamic data within the property pane, like a list. They want to be able to load up some sort of REST call response, or they want to grab maybe all the columns in a list, or they want you to be able to select a list from a Webpart. Great example, this would be like if you want to have a slider library Webpart, you need to define what list you want it to link to maybe. So your property pane needs to go grab a list of valid lists that the user could then pick from. The getPropertyPaneConfiguration, unfortunately, that method, it returns a static value, which means it doesn't allow dynamic data to come back that takes time to reply, i.e. it doesn't allow a promise. You can't go make a REST call to SharePoint to go ask for all the data, and then once it gets returned, then go ahead and tell getPropertyPaneConfiguration, okay, now I'm ready for you to return a value. Instead, what you need to do is you go load your dynamic data at some point. There's a new method that was created for us called onPropertyPaneConfiguration start. What we can do is we can say, hey, okay, the property pane is going to open. Great. Go trigger this. Go do something. Go grab data for me, and the property pane will appear. Once your data comes back, once the promise is fulfilled, you can then run a new command that was provided for us, a new method called this.context.propertypane.refresh. That will cause the SharePoint Framework to automatically reload getPropertyPaneConfiguration so that you can now use the dynamic data that came back from your refresh. Now, for those of you who are confused, don't worry. The custom code I have has a great example of this. We're going to try to get to it, but you can go look to see exactly how I get through all of this, so all that works out. Another thing you'd want to do, I'm sure, is go talk to SharePoint or go get external data, which is pretty cool. The framework provides us the ability to do this. It provides two primary classes for us. There's an HTTP client class. Both of these are found within an object that SharePoint provides, or a package SharePoint provides called SP-HTTP. So anyhow, the HTTP client is basically allows us to do simple REST operations to anything. But they also created for us the SP-HTTP client, which is cool because that allows us to make REST calls against SharePoint for us, but it already handles the context and security for us, which is really nice. So at the bottom, what you're looking at is some code where I need to go ahead and I need to import, this is TypeScript, I need to import from the @Microsoft/HP-HTTP because I want to be able to now use the SP-HTTP client. What I can then do is I can go get, I can do this SP-HTTP client.get. I can I say, hey, look, REST API in SPFx, I don't care how you do it, just go grab me a REST endpoint. And in this case, what I'm going to go grab is all the lists that are found within the current web that I'm in. I want to grab the ID and the title, and that's it. Just go grab me all the lists. And then when the promise is returned, I can then return for me the response in JSON. So there's some little things in there. I'm sort of skipping a course, but once you get used to that call, you don't have to worry about any of the plumbing. You can just use this SP-HTTP client, go get a REST endpoint, and then you can process the results when the promise is returned. Pretty simple stuff, pretty cool stuff. I think it's time to now go ahead and look at a whole bunch of demos on how we might be able to get SharePoint data as well as go and grab some properties. Okay, so to do this, before we actually get into that, let's look to see what happened on our previous Hello World. It seemed to have worked. Congratulations, the solution's been created. Now, if I go ahead and I run this command again, what's going to happen is it's going to notice that the solution's already there. It says add new Webpart to a solution that already exists. So I can call this Hello World 2. So I'm adding a new Webpart, new description, and it's done. That's how quick it is the second time to add two Webpart, second Webpart, third Webpart into an existing solution. So if I now type gulp serve, this is the new solution, not the previous one I was working with. This is the new Hello World solution. What we're going to see here is I can now have, that was actually not quite what I expected, but I have my Hello World, and it's the same exact Webpart I just had. But it does work. I can quickly go ahead and show you. I told you that there's the workbench on SharePoint, so I'm over at SharePoint.com workbench. And if I refresh this page, this should all work for me. I should have the same Hello World Webpart that I had before, and I can now test and develop off of SharePoint, if I so chose, the same Webparts, which is a nice extra little feature to be able to have with that workbench. Okay, so that was the, that was the problem. I think I was already listening. Yeah, that was why I was confused. Okay, let's try this again. I was trying to run two workbenches on the same machine. You can't do that. I had my Hello World still running. So now this should work out the way I was expecting it to. There we go. Okay, now we'll see. I have my two Hello World Webparts. That was what I was hoping for. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and shut that down so we don't confuse ourselves. Let's go ahead and go back to our code and let's see what else we want to do. So I want to go here. Oh, I sort of locked that up. No worries. Okay, let's go ahead and switch to our Hello World demos. I'm going to go ahead and gulp serve this code now because it's going to take a little bit of time, but we can load this up. You already have access to all this code, by the way, so hopefully that's really cool stuff. I'm in the Hello World folder. I told you I care about one primary folder, which is the SRC folder, so let's go ahead and jump into the source folder, and let's look at the web parts that I've made available to you. There's three that I care about here. They're kind of fun. There's the SharePoint data, so that we're going to look at next. That's how to go pull SharePoint data. And then if we want to have custom properties or custom properties that are pulling from dynamic sources, you can also look at some examples. So let's look at SharePoint data here, and let's look at the web part. the files that we care about here. Here's that TS folder, the TS file, the primary Webpart file. I told you there's the manifest file that we might use for custom properties for default values, and then you might have you'll have a props file, which is where custom properties are going to be. Now, I'm not touching that during this specific demo, so we'll look at that when we look at properties. The last thing I'm not really gonna look at, but I've built two other classes for us that that allow us to go grab our SharePoint data. So let's go ahead and let's look at the code in question. Let's go ahead and add this code. So we're gonna highlight this code as I'm gonna uncomment it out. We're gonna see what happens here. Now let's see if gulp is now running for us. It just actually loaded for us. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the SharePoint Data Webpart, and nothing happens. So there's really nothing here because I haven't uncommented anything out. So let's go ahead and let's comment out some code, change some code around, and let's see what happens. So the first thing I need to do is I need to import some additional classes, some additional stuff so that I can go grab some data. What I'm doing here is I want to go grab the environment type. We're going to look at that in a little bit, but I've created this new class that's I call it here list service, that's going to allow me to go grab list data. Simple stuff. This is TypeScript, a lot of stuff going on here. I don't have too much time to go into it, but what we care about is there's a render function that can get called, that will render the web part. I'm going to add into it that I want it to run a method that we're going to create here in a second called render list async. So go render a list asynchronously. So it's gonna basically the render function will load, and then once the list data comes back, something else will happen. Let's go ahead and scroll down and let's uncomment out some more code. Okay, and what's going on here? We found here's our function for our that we just said we're going to call, which is the render list asynchronous. Now within this, what I'm doing is I'm creating a variable that's allowing me to load a different processing methodology dependent upon if I am local or if I'm in SharePoint. If I'm doing local development, I'm going to load a mock list service. This will allow me to load mock data, not SharePoint data, but mock data, because I'm not connected to the internet, let's say. But if I am connected to SharePoint, then I'm actually going to load another methodology. Think classes here and whatnot, inheritance within C# and all that. I'm going to load a different methodology for list service that will go and actually pull data directly from SharePoint. At this point, no matter what, I can always now call getListNames if that's a method that both mock list service and list service provides, and I can go do something. On the return of the promise, I can render the list, and render the list is the next method that we see. Within that, I'm basically just going to loop through all of the items that are returned, and I'm going to print them out. Make sense-ish? I don't expect anyone to be able to rewrite this code right away, but hopefully when you see it, you can be like, oh yeah, okay, I remember what he talked about. Lastly, I can show the class, this list service class. Here's that REST call that we saw just a second ago in the presentation. It's basically that same thing. We're using SPHTTP client to go grab our data, and we're going to return the JSON. Okay, so let's save this one file. Okay, all I did was I hit Control-S to save. Let's go look at gulp. We can go see that gulp is doing something. Gulp is watching my code base, and if anything changes, it automatically refreshes it. It reloads it. Not only that, I didn't even refresh the browser. It refreshed it for me, and you can now see that some mock data appeared because I am working off my local machine. Now, if we quickly go return back to SharePoint, this I have to load manually, the workbench in SharePoint Online. And if I go ahead and I add the SharePoint Data Webpart, we will see that SharePoint automatically grabbed all of the lists for me automatically. Pretty cool. There's no smoke and mirrors here, people. This really is kind of that simple. Your hardest part is going to be the TypeScript. Learning TypeScript and trying to build your own code to do your own thing is where you're going to get most likely the most stuck. Okay, let's move on to the custom properties dynamic. The custom properties and dynamic are very similar. They have to do the same thing, but the dynamic is kind of a little more fun to look at. So first, if we look at the props file, we'll see that I added some properties that I want, and they're typed. So I want to have like a list name and column name. If we look at the manifest.json, we're going to see that I've provided some default values. Even though I defaulted them to nothing, I still didn't want undefined, so I defined them. And then finally, I have my TypeScript. Okay, so I've already added a whole bunch of stuff. What I care about is, I showed you there's a method called onPropertyPaneConfigurationStart. So what happens in all this code here is when the property toolchain is going to get loaded, I'm going to use a similar data service as I used before. I created my own. And I'm going to go ahead and grab all the list names. And then upon completion, I'm eventually going to run one of these commands dependent upon different things. I'm refreshing the property pane with my results. That's really it. The one last thing I need to do is the on property pane field. Excuse me, that's the change. I don't care about that quite yet. I don't care about render. I care about this one. The get property pane configuration. This will get fired every time someone opens up the property tool pane. I can add in my custom properties that I want, which are, so I'm going to grab a property pane dropdown. This is provided as a thing for me by the SharePoint Framework. I tell in it the property name I want, and then I give it the values that are needed in order for the thing to load. The last thing I skipped over, which I did on purpose, was the on-property field change. So anytime a property is changed, I can say, well, if the list is changed, so someone selected a list, now I need to go load those list columns. I can then go and do something else. I can go grab all of the list values, which we'll see down here. I can go ahead and load all the list values. I can go get all of the columns within that list. And again, I'm going to just go ahead and refresh the property pane. Let's see what happens here in practice. We can delete this. I can add. It's the second one. Okay, so we can see my custom properties are being listed here because I changed the render function. Now when I clicked on the pencil, the property pane configuration method was called and it loaded up the list. But before that, that start method was called and it went and automatically went to go and load up lists. Now this is based on mock data, but it grabbed a bunch of lists for me. Once I select the list, the onChange is going to get triggered, that onChange method. I notice that the list was changed, so at this point I go and grab the list columns, and I now populate the list column data structure, and I re-trigger that I want the property pane to refresh itself. And that's how I then can get a list of columns. All right, let's go ahead and let's see that live on SharePoint. So now I can go grab live data because I'm on SharePoint. So if I click on the add the web part, if I click on load, we can now see I have a list of all of the lists in my document library. So I can go ahead and go down to, I think style library should have what I'm looking for. And now once I've selected style library, I can go ahead and look at all the columns that are available to me because all the columns are then loaded for me. All just using this whole, the property configuration and whatnot created for me. So what are we looking at here? We are looking at a lot of TypeScript. That can be the confusing part. If you want to work with properties, you need to define your properties. You can set default values. And then once you do that, you can go ahead and when the property pane is loaded, you can tell it how you want your properties to be available to be edited. If you want dynamic values, you can definitely do them. You can definitely do that. And the last thing we sort of skipped over because it's just a lot of TypeScript is your render function. This is how the web part is going to get rendered. I'm not using a framework here. If you wanted to use React, you can use React. If you wanted to use Angular, you can use Angular. Actually, rendering your web part can be very complicated and convoluted depending upon just what you are trying to do. So in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving forward. I know that was a lot of data, but a lot of code. But download the code. You shouldn't have to do anything based on my demos except run gulp serve and run the workbench. I built them so they should work on anybody's environment. So once you've built your code, this is like the last 2%. You've just gone through a day, a week, a month, a year worth of web part development. You now need to deploy it. Okay, so this will be a fun live demo if we can get it to work. There's a whole bunch of stuff you need to set, I suppose. There's the config package solution.json. You may want to review that and make sure that your package is set up the way that you want it to. The other thing you want to do is there's a write manifest JSON also found in the config folder. This is where you're going to set up the content delivery network, or basically you're going to need to tell your web part where the JavaScript files are going to be loaded or hosted for your web part. They need to go somewhere. You can put them into Azure, and there's a whole Azure feature built into the web part so that you can automatically deploy this stuff into Azure Storage. Or you could deploy them into the site collection. You could deploy them on your own CDN for your particular product, let's say, or maybe your organization will have one content delivery network where all your web parts will get served from. But you need to tell your web part where that is. By default, if you don't do anything, the package will work, but it's going to point to localhost for you to actually load your web part, which means if you don't update write manifest, you don't give it a CDN, your web part's just going to get loaded locally, which means no one can see it. You can run it, you can deploy it into SharePoint, but no one's actually going to be able to use it. The process that I found to kind of make this all work, you can do a gulp clean. That will clean out everything, kind of start over. Gulp build and gulp bundle are both run by gulp serve if you don't want to run gulp serve, but that will rebuild the solution. It will then bundle up all of the solution into the proper JavaScript and CSS, etc. You can now package the solution. That's the gulp package solution. That will create your SP app file within the SharePoint folder. That's what you're going to now need to move somewhere. That's what you're going to move into SharePoint, your app catalog. If you were ready to ship this, so now you want your you want to create the minified version of your bundle that will be put onto a CDN. You can run gulp ship. And finally, if you're ready to fully package this up, I have found I need to run gulp package solution -- ship. This will recreate your SP app file, your package, with the proper CDN info. If you didn't run gulp package first, gulp package solution first, then gulp ship. If you need to run those first individually, then you can run gulp package solution ship. That will update your package so that it has the proper CDN. Otherwise, it's going to be hosting locally. That's, to me, kind of confusing. Once you've created that file, you can now go to the SharePoint solution folder, you grab the SP app file, you move that into your app catalog. Once it's been added into your app catalog, you can now add the web part as an app in a given SharePoint site. Once the app's been added, it might take a few seconds. You can now add that web part to a content page. You should be able to add that to both classic and modern web part zones, web part areas. You're going to need to eventually configure the CDN for full web part deployment for sure. I've given you another link to that because it can get a little convoluted. But you can also just deploy all of your bundle into SharePoint anywhere you want. You can just manually do all of that. Okay. In the few minutes that we have left, we are going to go ahead and attempt to package this all up. How are we going to do that? Okay, I have my app catalog already loaded. So this is my app web. I'm going to go to apps for SharePoint. I could just actually go to app request, should be fine. And I am going to go app to SharePoint. And if we see here in the site contents, we should not have any apps currently available to us, which looks correct. Oh, wow, it already still has that. That shouldn't be there. It could be. I found modern is surprisingly not always that good. I thought I'd removed all of this, but let me go ahead and remove that app. And when we do that, of course, we'll have to go to the recycle bin and make sure it's fully gone. Okay. While that's all happening, let's go ahead and let's close all of that. Let's go ahead and let's see if I've already packaged it up. I don't think I have. We don't need that. Let me minimize that. Solutions. I forgot. They renamed the package SPPKG. I said it's SP app. They didn't. It's the SPPKG. So that's the solution. So I've already ran the gulp package solution. In interest of time, I should be able to run it again. Let's just run it again. Package solution. And that should change this timeline so that it should be now. Did that happen? It did? Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and we're going to copy and paste over. Whoops, did that work? There we go. Let's try that. I just moved it right over, and SharePoint is smart enough to realize what I just did, and it's going to be like, oh, cool. Okay, that's what you want. Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so it's going to add that. Now I need to go back to site contents. I want to make sure that that thing is gone. It is. Let's go to the recycle bin because we need to make sure it is gone. And of course, we need to typically go to second stage recycle bin once that's done to make sure it's out of there too. Recycle bin. Good stuff, huh? Okay. Now let's go ahead and we're going to add an app. If everything went okay, we should see our app here. Oh, you know, I probably just deleted what was just added. Wouldn't that be funny? I think I did. The app should be here, but of course it's not because I think they probably just overwrote what I just added. So it was deleting potentially an update of what I just did. Let's check one more time, and if it doesn't load, then I'm going to have to go ahead and I'm going to delete it from the app web and try to do it again. Okay, delete, remove, delete. This is our last demo. We're scheduled to go till 12:15 Pacific, so we will have this finished up as soon as we can. Okay, so I've re-added it yet again. Typically, I have found that once you've added it here, it really doesn't take too long to show up in your in the webs that you want to use it in. But of course, probably now I've deleted it and adding it, it's just causing. Oh, there we go. Good. It did in fact work. Perfect. Okay, and it has been deployed, which is exactly what we want. Now let's go ahead yet again and see if we can add a web. Yep, same tenant. Wrong page. Still not there. It will eventually show up. Anyhow, what I'm looking for is that eventually we would get the app. Typically, I found that it shows up right at the top of the list, and we can then go ahead and add it. And it's still just being painful. It's probably going to take like 5 or 10 minutes, and that would be good to go. I then have a file here. I created a demo web. It would be here. Let's go ahead and just load this page up, and I can show you the last component here that should exist. What's supposed to happen if everything went okay is when you edit this page, you would then see your web parts listed here, and you could actually then add them, and they work all beautifully. Again, I gave you the links to do it. It's, I think, because I shouldn't have deleted that other one. I thought I had cleaned up this tenant before I had tried all this stuff, but obviously I'm having problems. This web part demo client-side solution should show up just fine here in the add an app, and then once it's here, it should then easily be able to, you just add it, pretty simple to do. At that point, you can now find it here. The deployment I have found really is the delay between when you add an app in a web and then when you want to add it as a web part. That can typically take 1 to 2 minutes to appear. That's just frustrating because I know this was working an hour ago. But that's the deployment. It normally works just fine. Obviously, it's just taking time. Something's stuck. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the slide deck because we don't want to get, there's no reason to keep getting delayed on that. If you want to connect to external libraries, which I'm sure you're going to want to do, that's fine. TypeScript does transpile to JavaScript. The catch is that external libraries really require some sort of typings because TypeScript needs to know the type of all the different methods and variables and whatnot that your external library will have. Most popular libraries already have typings with it. What you would do, so let's say you want to add jQuery, which is pretty popular, you would use npm to go grab jQuery, and then you would go grab the typings of it at type/jQuery. If you're going to use a library, you should go check to see if a typings already exists for it, because that will make your life so much easier. Within the config.json file, you need to set in external areas that tells your whole project where you can go grab where that external library is so that it knows how to include it in the bundle. Now, once you've done that, within the web part, you can go grab and import what it is you want to import from your library. So in this case, I'm importing everything within the jQuery library, and I'm going to define it in my own little local variable called my jQuery. So now I could then say, okay, well, let's go ahead and create a workspaces variable. It is of type jQuery, and it's going to equal, now I can use my function I created of my jQuery and go grab and just work with jQuery like I normally would. Lots of libraries you can use. It can be a little challenging, I found, to get an external working properly the first time, but once you do it, it really isn't that bad. And you should be able to add most any code you want within your SharePoint Framework Webpart. So a recap of some important commands that I want you to know about. There's the yo at Microsoft SharePoint. That's how you're going to create your a base project, a base solution. The next ones that I care about are gulp serve. You should just know that. That will compile and start your local workbench. If you want to run a local web server for a build, say you're testing off of SharePoint, you can actually load this with no browser by using the -- no browser. And then there's all the bundle commands I talked about, the packaging commands. The last one is, I didn't show it all. If you want to automatically deploy your Webpart into your Azure storage, you can do that by configuring the config, which is in deploy-azure-storage.json. Okay. I'm going to leave it with some recommendations I really hope that you follow. First of all, the biggest stumbling block you're going to run into is TypeScript. Learn TypeScript. You must learn TypeScript. It is worth your time and effort. You will thank me for it once you've done it. Please, please, please do that. When you're connecting to data, which most libraries are going to somehow do, use the APIs that Microsoft provided for you. In particular, there's the SPHTTP client, and then there's HTTP client. And I skipped this. It was in the code, though, if you were paying attention. Those two clients are automatically available for you. You don't even have to initialize them. There's a variable we have access to called this.context. It provides you a context of this Webpart. Within the Webpart code itself, the Webpart class itself, this.context already has SPHTTP client and HTTP client available to you. So if you have specific classes or methods that you build outside of your Webpart class, you can just send along this.context.http client, and your class can already have it available to it. So really cool stuff. Best way to get a hold of SharePoint data and external data is to use the tools that are available to you. Why reinvent all of that stuff? If you're going to use external frameworks, libraries, etc., I would recommend you look for ones that have typings. Again, most of them already do. If you type in Google search TypeScript space typing space your library like jQuery, you're going to learn all about it. And there's a whole library out there of all the typings that are available for you. I didn't talk about this really, but if you're going to be providing styling within your Webpart, I do recommend you look at the Office UI Fabric, which provides a style setting for you, a style network, a style components for you so that your Webpart sort of fits within what SharePoint looks like. It will speed up a lot of your development time because then you don't have to worry about styling. You can focus on your code. Most likely, if you need help, there's documentation out there. There is hundreds of hours, I think literally, of online videos now of how to use the framework by some pretty good experts. There is hundreds, if not thousands, of good pages of content on how to build framework components, framework Webpart. It's not nearly finished, but a lot of the basic stuff is there. So there's a great way to get started, which is the link I provided. And the last thing I'm going to show is a bunch of the links, and I'll leave it at that slide for a little while here. But what did we do? We looked at the framework as an overview. We looked at its tool chain because you've got to get the build environment set up. We then built a Webpart. We looked at its major components, really everything found within the source code. And then lastly, we looked at how you might make it better, actually add in more stuff like adding properties in, doing some packaging, looking at external libraries and things like that. So some resources that I want you to know about. First of all, first place I would start is at the SharePoint Framework overview that Microsoft provided. They provide you a lot of the getting started walkthroughs and video links that I just sort of went through. If you want to know more about the API that is provided for you, all of the endpoints that are within the framework itself has been documented, and it's pretty good. So if you're looking for code, If you're looking for like how am I supposed to do this, or what is the variables that are available to me for a specific method that the framework provides, there's an API out there for you. I'm going to give you some links for adding properties in the web parts, connecting to SharePoint Data, working with React, etc. As well as there was a pretty good introduction. Now it's old. It's Ignite. It was Ignite from last year, but there was a pretty good introduction last year on the SharePoint framework. That was when they were still really in the initial code drops, the pre-release stuff. So it is a little old, but it is a good place to get started on some of your videos. And the last thing, what I really hope you get out of this, because again, I try to stay at like 200 level. If you want my code, if you really want to get started, go grab my code, go into the SPF Webpart demo folder, run gulp serve, and you're going to have those web parts right there. You can start tearing apart what I did to really help you get to do some more stuff. If you want to learn about React, there is a React web part demo folder in that solution as well. You'll see some pretty, I like to think that they're pretty sophisticated solutions that I refactored. They were from publicly available solutions that people in the community created that help demo and show off how to build a React-based framework. So with that, really appreciate everyone's time. Something I do want you to know about is if you are looking to go to SharePoint Fest, or if you are looking for a conference in the next month or so, SharePoint Fest Denver is happening at the end of May. If you go to spfest.com, you can learn about it. I'm giving 2 sessions, both on Wednesday the 31st. I would hope that you come to join me. If you're looking to get some discounts, let me know. I'm pretty sure that you can use a discount code of my last name to help you save some money. So unless there's any questions, I am going to go ahead and wait around for a few minutes. But I really appreciate everyone's time. I hope this helped get you started. I'm really looking forward to seeing the solutions you build or you work on. So if you end up building some web parts and you see me at a conference or something, please do come and find me and show off your work. I would love to see what people are doing with this framework. We have years worth of development here to learn how to use this to its fullest extent. So I'm really excited to see what happens. So Michael, are there any questions? If not, then I really appreciate everyone's time.
All right, thanks, Eric. That was a really, really great session. We don't have any questions at the moment. Oh, someone did ask if you could display the link for your slide deck, or if you could give out that link again, if you got it somewhere.
That's all the way at the top. The best way is go to slideshare.net/eOverfield. If you go to slideshare.net/eOverfield, you will find all of my slide decks. This is the more recent one I added, and you'll see it there. That's the best way.
Got it. All right, and we'll also send that out. So like I said earlier, we're recording this session. We'll get it up as soon as we can, and we'll make sure we attach the link to the slide deck in that as well. While we're waiting for some more questions to come in, let me tell you guys about what's coming up next for us in the world of webinars. We've got one coming up in May that will cover using UI Fabric, and then our next one, and then the one after that in June, we'll go over using React, kind of dive back into framework web parts and all that. Both of those being done by Eric. We'll have more info about that going up soon as well. If you want to get a hold of anybody at PixelMill, our website is pixelmill.com. You can reach out to us on Twitter at PixelMillTeam is the handle. Eric's also got his own website, of course, because he's cool like that, ericoverfield.com. You can find him on Twitter at ericoverfield, exactly like that. And yeah, that's all the social media stuff I got. I got a lot of thank yous. People really liking what you're doing. Dave Lavelle said that he's a Notepad MVP, in case you were curious. Thank you, Dave, for that. And yeah, Eric, you may have done such a good job of covering everything that there aren't a whole lot of questions left.
Good. I did see that Ryan Scouten, one of my good buds, he mentioned that the app I wasn't seeing because it was in the AppStream organization. Yep, I screwed up. It happens. It was there. You'll find it. Follow the instructions, and you'll be able to add your own stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. I really appreciate everyone's time. I look forward to seeing you, talking to you next month as well. At our next webinar, we'll look at Office UI Fabric, as Michael was saying. And thanks again. Have a great rest of the day. Have a great weekend. Yeah, thank you all.
Take care, everybody. See you next time.